Are you a fan of the Jason Bourne novels? Well, stay tuned. Ahead, I'll talk with Brian Freeman about Robert Ludlum's The Bourne Shadow. Hi, I'm Dan Skinner, and this is Some Books Considered. Brian Freeman is the best-selling author of over 25 novels, including the Jonathan Stride series and several popular standalones. Robert Ludlum, the original author of the Jason Bourne series, passed away in 2001. Brian Freeman is now carrying on Ludlum's legacy. He joins us to talk about his fifth book in the series, The Bourne Shadow. Brian, welcome to Some Books Considered.
Well, thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Well, this is the fifth novel that you've written in the Jason Bourne series, so where do you take readers this time?
Well, this time, when you're talking about a long-running series like the Bourne novels, I always like to kind of go to ground every few books and bring in new story arcs and bring in new characters because I think it allows sort of a fresh look for readers of the series, and it also invites new readers into the series as well. So in my last book, The Bourne Defiance, which was my fourth Bourne novel, I sort of wrapped up a lot of the threads and story arcs that I'd begun all the way back in the Bourne Evolution. And now in the Bourne Shadow, I'm sort of bringing some new characters and some new stories into the series. So Bourne, of course, before he became the spy known as Jason Bourne, before he joined that shadowy organization called Treadstone, he was a man named David Webb. But he's forgotten all of that past life. So when he meets a woman who recognizes him as David Webb, he realizes that this is a link to his forgotten past. And of course, this is a Bourne novel. So as he begins to hunt this down, all of the lies and betrayals and violence of that time come roaring back to life.
And you begin this book 10 years ago, and you set up a situation that leaves readers wondering what is going on here. And it's something that takes the rest of the novel to figure out.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to that time when Bourne was David Webb, and I go back to his very first mission for Treadstone when he's a young spy. He doesn't really understand what's going on. He's impulsive. He's well trained, but he hasn't yet got the experience to sort of ground him in what he's doing. And the risk is that he makes mistakes, and so he winds up in this very violent situation on the top of a Swiss mountain. And years later now, when he's Jason Bourne, he doesn't remember any of that. And yet what he's about to discover is that part of his past is going to be coming back to life.
And the thing is that even if he did remember, what he thought he knew at that time just wasn't true.
Yes. Bourne's mantra is trust no one. And that is definitely true in this book because he begins to discover that much of what he's been told about his past was actually a lie.
Does this book stand alone, or is it important to know Bourne's back history?
Well, I've written a number of series under my own name, and obviously now this is the fifth book in the Bourne series. And when I'm talking about series books, I always try to write them in such a way that each series book can invite new readers to the party. I want to provide enough details about the characters that you feel like you get a full understanding of them, but not provide so much backstory that's been in the previous books that existing series readers will go, yes, I know all that, move on. So it's kind of that delicate balancing act in writing a series. But I'm always trying to make sure that each book will invite new readers in and they can get a full, rich experience of the character.
Now, I'm wondering about the challenge as an author, because obviously this was originally written by Robert Ludlum, and then there was another author who wrote books in that series, and then you now are writing this series. So there's a lot of kind of like what we might call canon in this series. And I'm curious about, because you can draw upon that, does that make it easier, or the fact that all that exists sometimes make it harder to navigate creating new stories?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both. And then, of course, you have to add into the equation the fact that beyond the Ludlum novels and beyond the Erich von Lußbader novels, you also, of course, have all of the Matt Damon movies that were so popular and that really defined Jason Bourne for so many people around the world. So you've got a lot of different iterations of Bourne. in some ways, that would make it harder if I were trying to sort of balance all of those different things and be true to all of those different stories and characters. But when I first was taking over the series, I talked with the editor at Putnam, and I said, because we've got so many different visions of Bourne over the course of the past 40 years, what I think we really need to do is reboot the series and sort of start fresh and go back to Ludlum's original character from the Bourne identity and create that character in a very authentic way that's true to Ludlum's vision, but drop him down into all new settings, all new stories with an all new cast of supporting characters around him, so that for the series now it feels fresh. You don't have to feel like you know everything that's gone beyond before you can start reading my books.
So I think that must have been a challenge for you to honor the work that Ludlum did and the Bourne legacy, so to speak, but also then write it from your own perspective and put your own voice into this character.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. On the style side, I mean, Robert Ludlum had a very distinctive, very sort of breathless prose style that just propelled you through the pages. But I think if you tried to emulate or imitate that style, it would come across as a caricature. And so what I've really tried to do is let some of Ludlum's elements of style flow into my own work. So the result is kind of a blend of Ludlum and Freeman. And when it comes to the character, that's absolutely true. My first Bourne novel, The Bourne Evolution, in some ways I saw as sort of a tribute to Ludlum, a tribute to the Bourne identity, and it was kind of an honoring that original book. My second book was The Bourne Treachery, and when I was writing it, I remember in the early going feeling a little frustrated that it felt like it was going slowly and things weren't really coming together as smoothly as I wanted. And I realized that I needed to give myself permission to sort of share ownership of the character and to allow Bourne to become a Freeman character, not just a Robert Ludlum character, and to realize that Bourne was going to evolve and change and grow based on the things that were happening in my books. And once I sort of figured that out and allowed myself to take ownership of the character, then everything began to flow more smoothly. And I've now seen Bourne sort of evolve over the course of several books.
So let's talk a bit about that. How has this character evolved over the course of your books?
Well, it's always interesting to compare Bourne as he was in the Ludlum novels and Bourne the way that so many people know him in the Matt Damon movies. And I think in the movies what you see is a more laconic action hero. He's a loner. He doesn't really have a lot of people in his life. I think about the Bourne Ultimatum, which was a terrific movie, but gosh, I don't think Matt Damon had hardly 10 lines of dialogue in the entire film. That's a very different image of Bourne than the image that Ludlum created. And so I think that he's a more complex psychological character, and he has more of a need for having someone in his life. The relationship in the Bourne identity with Marie St. Jacques is really at the core of who Bourne is. And that's what I've tried to do in my books as well, because Bourne is a passionate guy. He's drawn to women, but he also has that reluctance because he knows he's putting anyone at risk who gets close to him, and yet he also feels very close to the people in the book. So I've tried to do that balancing act and bring in characters that really reflect that part of what Bourne's nature is.
I'm talking with Brian Freeman about The Bourne Shadow, and our conversation continues in a moment. If you appreciate this discussion, please subscribe, like, and click on the bell so you'll know when I post new interviews. And thank you. And in this latest book, there are strong female characters, and without giving away any spoilers, there's a character named Monica who shows up in the very first chapter, and then later when we're reintroduced to her, she's a very different person than we first thought she might be.
Well, yes, and I think it's certainly true in the Bourne novels that no one is quite what they seem to be on the outside. And as I say, because the women in Bourne's life are a very important part of the character and a very important part of the series, I really like to have interesting, complex women characters around him, and so you really have two all new women characters in this book, Monica and Johanna, and both have a very significant role to play in Bourne's life, and yet right from the get-go, you start asking yourself whether, in fact, they're on the up and up, and whether Bourne's getting the true story of who these people are.
One thing I wanted to ask you, it's a question I like to ask all authors of fiction, and it's this. If you could spend a day in real life with one of the characters from your novel, who would it be and why?
Oh, well, that's a good question. I think I'd be a little leery of spending too much time with Jason Bourne because, gosh, there are an awful lot of people out there trying to kill him, and I'd be concerned about collateral damage. I guess. I guess I really enjoy the character of Monica, and besides the fact that Monica lives off on Holy Island in the UK, which is this wonderful island off the British coast, and it's one of my favorite places in the world. So I guess I could see sitting in the pub with her and having a drink and talking about our history with Bourne.
Another thing that I want to talk to you about is just character development. And you take a character like Monica, who appears to be one thing and then becomes something later. How did you go about sort of creating that character?
Yeah, character development is it's partly planned, but it's partly instinct, and I think that I would sort of lean more toward the latter. I used to, when I was writing my books, do very detailed background sketches on the characters, and I wanted to know sort of everything about them before I started. And I've gone away from that because what I would find is that despite all of that work at the outset, trying to figure out who that character was, as the character began to take shape on the page, I'd find that they would sort of want to pull me in new directions, and they would evolve in different ways that I hadn't necessarily seen coming. And I learned to trust the characters and trust what they were telling me. So I would sort of let them go. So I find that with characters now, I don't like to think about them too much before I start. I like to just have a rough idea of who they are and then let them take shape on the page and sort of guide me through their twists and turns. So inevitably, I learn things about the character as I'm writing the book that I didn't know before I started. And in the case of Monica, there were definitely some twists that come through toward the end of the book that I hadn't even perceived about that character when I began to sort of put the plot together.
Let's talk a little bit about research, because every novel requires research to get those details right. Did this novel pose any particular research challenges for you?
I don't think there were any particular challenges. Research is always is always something where you want to you don't want to overload the reader with research because that tends to slow down the plot and it slows down the pace of the book. And yet you want it to feel believable and authentic. You want to be able to create a world that readers will willingly drop themselves into. Years and years ago, I remember reading an interview with Robert Ludlum, and they asked him a question about how much research he does for his books. And I loved his response. He said that he does less research than his readers think and more than his family believes. What I try to do, it's kind of an odd description, but if you recall the movie Somewhere in Time with Christopher Reeve and Jane Seymour, it was a time travel movie. And at the end, the way that Christopher Reeve realizes that he's not actually in the past, he's actually in the present, is he finds a modern penny in the pocket of his old suit. And I always tell readers, when it comes to research, my goal is to avoid pennies. I want to be able to provide just enough research and just enough authenticity that it will feel right to you. And I never want you to come across something in the book, whether it's a setting, a locale, an approach to a particular thing, or scientific or criminal or whatever it might be, that suddenly jolts you out of the book and makes you think, oh, wait, no, it could never happen like that. So that's kind of my goal with research, is to provide enough of that authentic flavor that readers will come along for the ride.
And the ride this time is in the book, The Bourne Shadow. And that title, to me, means the shadow of his past. What did you mean by that title, or what significance it would have?
Yeah, well, there are a lot of layers to the idea of shadows in this book, and I think that yes, it is certainly the shadow of Bourne's past. There's an actual character that has the code name Shadow that emerges in the book, and there's kind of this darkness that trails Bourne wherever he goes. I think that he has a shadow following him because he doesn't know his past. He doesn't remember who he was. He's always struggling with that sense of identity, that sense of who is he and is he a moral man? And so I think that's part of the shadow that is always with Bourne as well.
What is it about the Bourne character that keeps you interested after all these books and after your contribution to the series?
Well, I think that Bourne is such an interesting, complex psychological character. I really think that's what keeps him fresh. He's not a superhero. He's not a character where it's the same person in every story and it's simply the action around him that changes. Bourne continues to evolve and he continues to struggle with questions of identity, and he continues to attempt to come to terms with his past and with who he is and with his relationships. That, I think, is what keeps him fresh. I think that's why he appeals to readers as well, because I think readers go through that same experience in their own lives. They're always sort of thinking about their identity. They're evaluating questions about who they are and how their past made them the kind of person they are today. And Bourne's doing the same thing, just doing it on a very dramatic level.
You're writing this series, but you also have a series that you originated and some standalone books as well. So what's next for you?
Yeah, it's a busy year with the Bourne Shadow now out in not even 2 more months. I've got a new standalone thriller called Break Every Rule that is going to be coming out on September 10th, and I'm really excited about that book. I was deliberately trying to create a standalone hero who sort of combined the best qualities of Jason Bourne on one side and Jonathan Stride, my police procedural hero in Duluth, on the other. So Break Every Rule is a story about a man with a lot of secrets who realizes that his wife had been keeping secrets of her own, and as when she disappears, he goes on this elaborate quest to find her and has to sort of become the man he hoped he never had to be again.
The book is Robert Ludlum's The Bourne Shadow, a Jason Bourne novel by Brian Freeman. Brian, thank you for talking with me today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
If you'd like to purchase The Bourne Shadow, I've placed a link for you in the description below. And if you'd like to see more videos about books and their authors on a wide variety of topics, be sure to subscribe, like, and click on the bell to be notified about future programs. I'm Dan Skinner. Thank you for watching this edition of Some Books Considered.